Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Plazas, Opinion Engagement Editor for the Tennessean. We're here with the editorial board members, Laura Hollingsworth, our president and publisher, and Maria DeVarine, our news director. We have the pleasure of having Megan Barry, candidate for Nashville mayor, here today. We're going to have an in-depth discussion about her positions, about her thoughts on running for mayor. Remember that the election is August 6th, and today, Tuesday, July 7th, is the last day to register to vote, so please do so and get involved and participate. Thank you so much, Megan. We appreciate you being here.
I appreciate this. Thank you all for inviting all of us to come before you and take the time to do this. Thank you.
So what's very interesting to people right now is who's going to make the runoff, essentially. That's what people are talking about this moment.
It's very interesting to all the candidates.
And you've had a recent internal poll. And could you talk to us, since this has been the news of the last couple of days, could you talk to us a little bit about how the poll was arranged and what you've learned from this poll, both the things that you've got to work on and the things that you're really strong on?
Sure. So I think, candidates poll all the time if they have the resources to do it. This is our second poll. We did a poll in April, and then we did one now to just, after we had the luxury of having some TV airtime, we wanted to see what we were doing, to see what was moving the needle. And we went out and we did what, we used a national pollster who has a national reputation, and the way they conducted the poll was to do what all pollsters do. They ask the horse race question first. So, these are all the candidates that are in the race. They're mixed up every time. Who would you vote for if that election was today? And those were the results that we released. I think you all published those. So, and then we took a deeper dive into some other questions where we looked at messaging, and we tested messaging on some of the other candidates out there, looking at their record, comparing their record to mine. And we used that more for our own messaging. But the one that matters is the first one, the first question that is about, who would you vote for today? And that's what we gave to the media.
And the poll itself, and you came out in a very strong second in that poll.
Yes.
But there's also 18% undecided, so that's pretty significant as well.
It is, although I think you've seen the release of other candidates' polls throughout this, and I think you've seen that undecided number go down. And I think that's, again, the consistency in the polling across all candidates is, I think, what you can look for as far as benchmarks on where the race is really going.
Sure. I know that one of your opponents, at least, has called the poll, shall we say, I think the word was disingenuous. So, would you like to answer that?
No. I think at the end of the day, we stand by our poll results, and we're confident that the poll gave us what we needed.
And we've talked quite a bit about leadership. Oh, please go.
Go ahead. No,
about leadership in terms of the role of the mayor. We had talked about crisis management during
Right.
the first debate. One of the things, too, is when the mayor should speak, and should the mayor speak on all sorts of issues. You certainly garnered national attention about the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue, and also issues on pride, for example. You were the first officiant, I believe, to marry a same-sex couple in Nashville. Tell us a little bit about your thought process behind this, and do you think it's the appropriate role for the mayor to tackle these particular issues?
Well, remembering that I'm actually an elected official at the moment, and I have been elected now countywide for the last 8 years, and I absolutely see my role to speak out on issues that are relevant to our county. So with that in mind, I have taken a lead on fair wage, I've taken a lead on non-discrimination, I've taken a lead on our tree canopy, I've taken a lead on diversifying our boards and commissions, and creating a minority purchasing office. So I think it is the role of an elected official to lead, and as the mayor, I would do the same.
I think people were, many were surprised and fascinated by the fact that you presided over that first gay marriage. Was that very purposeful on your part? That was something that you wanted to do, recognize that moment? And did that have anything to do in your mind with where you're at in the campaign, or was that a completely personal choice, maybe?
Well, one of the things that has been a really wonderful part of being on the Metro Council is we have the power to marry. So I've married lots of people throughout the course of the last 8 years, and I told the clerk, I'll come down and marry people because I'm assuming that you're going to have a lot of people who are going to come on this very special day. And I'm there to help you, just like I've done on Valentine's Days when we've had a lot of folks come. And it was personal and it was special. So I was actually really honored to be part of it. And I was.
Did you know that you'd be doing the very first one?
I did not know. I felt really honored to be the first one to be able to marry somebody in Tennessee after the Supreme Court finally made equality the law of the land.
One of the things, obviously, that if you were elected mayor, you'd be the first female mayor of Nashville. Talk a little bit about that significance and maybe some of the challenges that you've seen, because obviously one of the things that we constantly see in the media is sometimes there's a lot of talk about style over substance, and this one, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, I would be the first woman mayor of Nashville, and I think that is an important step just for all women to be able to see other women have jobs of importance, and I think that sends a wonderful message. But the reason I should be the next mayor of Nashville is because I'm the most qualified candidate. Now, if somebody out there wants to vote for me because I'm a woman, I'll take that too. But it really is about being the most qualified. And when you look at, I think, how women are treated in the workplace, you still see disparities. And in fact, I think I've recounted this story. I mean, I was stopped on the street once by somebody who said, now if we vote for you for mayor, we can reduce your salary because women only make 77 cents on the dollar. So we'll get a deal if we elect you. So you still hear that. I mean, I think he was kind of joking, but the struggle, and we saw this recently in the disparity report that was put out about Metro government. There are disparities, and I think as a woman, I bring a special eye to that, but no more than I think anybody else who cares deeply about making sure that equity is part of the conversation.
In terms of language, it's very interesting. I've watched all the live debates, either the ones we replay, the ones that we've had, or the Fox Tribeca one, and you made a very interesting comment during that debate about being the quarterback and not the cheerleader when it came to the public school system. Tell us what you mean by that.
Sure. I think that there are definitely bright spots in our public education, and where there are bright spots, we need to do more. We need to do more IB programs, more AP programs, but I also think that although we have great teachers and some really great principals, and boy, parents who care deeply about their children's education, we also need to do more of what we haven't done as well of, and that is, for me, it's been pre-K. So when I look at what our current mayor has been able to do with education, I look at this and I think, okay, he's been able to take our budget, and we have fully funded our traditional public schools over the last 8 years. And he's also been innovative. And I think that's the marriage that you are looking for in any type of a mayor with an education approach. And that innovation has been to actively go out and seek grant funding for things that aren't in the budget, like the pre-K program that we just brought in. And we know that pre-K makes a difference. So we have a $33 million grant over 5 years to put pre-K seats, but we left 600 kids on a wait list this year. So how do we become much more innovative? And when I talk about being the quarterback, it means making sure that we are moving that ball down that field as opposed to just standing on the sidelines saying, oh, isn't that great? I want us to actually make progress.
Since we're on education, can you talk with us a little bit about your viewpoint of what's happened recently with the school board, with the interim selection, and then also with the 4 finalists being announced yesterday? Talk with us a little bit about what you would like to see and achieve and what your thoughts are on those finalists.
Sure. So I go back to the conversation that we had with the search firm. The search firm did give all mayoral candidates an opportunity to sit down with them. Some mayor candidates chose to do that and some didn't. And what we did is we actually had a conversation about what we thought the next superintendent should include. And my vision was somebody who had success in working in an urban school district, somebody who had the leadership skills and the communication skills to bridge the gap between teachers, parents, and principals, and to lead. I will tell you that I've had a top line look at these 4 finalists, and at the moment, I would like to sure know more about all of them. And that opportunity is going to happen this week when the school board is taking a much more deeper dive. The one thing that I think makes me a little different than potentially some of the other mayor candidates is I actually want to have the information as opposed to just reacting to saying we have to stop or we have to stop doing something. Like, give me the data. Let me see exactly what we're looking at here. And I've always been very deliberate about the school board's process and said if the school board needs more time, they should take more time. They should put the best candidate in that seat. I've had the opportunity to work with Chris Henson when I was the budget chair. He was also the budget chair and the CFO for the schools. He's a great guy. If we have to have him as an interim for longer, I'm completely comfortable with that.
Tell us a little bit about your leadership style. You're going from, if you're elected, you'd be going from council person to mayor. How do you make that adjustment, going from someone who's an advocate, perhaps someone who's been a budget chair, to actually now running 50 departments and being the head of Davidson County?
So I think what the next mayor has to have is a deep understanding of government, which you just mentioned that I've got this understanding of government, but I also think I bring with me the skills of business. I have spent the last 25 plus years in business, and I understand how business works. The last company that I worked for, I came in and I was brought in to fundamentally change how we did our business practices. And my reporting relationship was to the board, and I had to influence everybody else. So the way to move from under a Senate investigation to a Baldrige Award winner is that you get people to come along with you. And for me, it's about integrity, transparency, and honesty, and accountability. And I think you see that with, again, going back to our disparity report. If you want to have accountability around meeting numbers for hiring, you make sure that that's a priority. And it means making sure that you're actually looking in the talent pools of where you may find these qualified candidates. And I think that's something that I saw with my own business experience. I also, we had $50 billion in spend through our contracts on an annual basis. We were a small company, but we had a large impact on healthcare. And I bring that ability to take those skills throughout Metro, and I also understand how Metro works.
You talked about the importance of transparency and integrity and accountability. How would you describe yourself as a leader? And then how would people who work for you or the board that you work for describe you?
So I think that how I would describe myself and how others would describe me would be in tandem. And that is someone who comes to the table with a vision and a plan, then requires and desires that buy-in. So the way you're going to move Metro departments is to have that vision, but also then to say, this is how we're going to get there. And you've got to solicit their input to get there. But ultimately, as a leader, you make the decision. So let me give you a great example. When I was in my last position, we had senior executives who had significant equity stakes in companies that we had contracts with. That's a clear perceived conflict of interest if you are making contracting decisions based on that. So eventually the decision was, you have to divest. I mean, we're not going to have a discussion about this. This is what we have to do in order to be transparent and accountable. So I think at the end of the day, you have to actually make a decision as a leader and then say, there's no room here, this is where we're headed.
And then how do you handle situations similar to that where there is a conflict and maybe folks are not coming around to your vision for what needs to happen?
Well, not everybody does come along all the time. And in my experience, people who are not happy with the leadership often have to have a helping hand to move on.
Back to that leadership style, just
Sure.
and then one last question on that. Can you give us some adjectives, just one-word adjectives that your staff previously or in business and Metro Council peers would use to describe you?
Sure. Committed, passionate, receptive, a listener, innovative, data-driven, best practices, personable, friendly, and compassionate.
You had mentioned at the debate, the first debate, that person you admired, you mentioned Pat Shea from YWCA. Tell us a little bit about that. Why is that, and what are the qualities that you wish or do emulate of her?
Sure. So Pat and I serve on the YW board together, and I have been blown away by Pat's incredible commitment and leadership to ending domestic violence. And what Pat does really well is she creates those partnerships that are not just driven through the why. So she goes out and finds other community partnerships. She's not so narrow in her perspective that she thinks that the why is the only one that can solve this problem. So she is absolutely out there looking for the opportunities to work with anybody who will partner with her to make that change and move that needle. So that to me is really the essence of a great leader. Who can you find to partner with that can help you solve this problem? And Pat does that incredibly well.
Can you give us an example, if you're elected mayor, are there certain departments or certain projects where you've thought, if I'm elected, this is a place where we could have a partnership, whether it's public-private or some other example of a partnership?
Sure. Well, I think public-private partnerships are absolutely on the table for a lot of what we do. Yesterday I spent a lot of time talking to a woman who's over at Nashville General Hospital. And General Hospital, although we give them a $35 million subsidy every year, and we need to increase their payer mix so that they continue to be a viable hospital, and we've done that by saying, like, this is a great example, how can we get a bigger payer mix over there? Well, let's give all Metro employees who decide to take their healthcare dollars over there, we will waive their copay. That's innovative. So now Metro employees who go over there have their copay waived, but we've increased the payer mix for Metro General. So when we were talking about this, trying to find other ways to increase that payer mix. So what are the other options out there that we can do? Well, clearly Insure Tennessee would put 30,000 folks back on the rolls, and that would help. But the partnerships that exist with Lentz Health, with Matthew Walker, with all of these other nonprofits out there, United Health, are a way for us to say, how do we solve our community health problems? Government's not going to do it by ourselves, but our community health numbers are pretty bad. We are consistently in the bottom 40 for child obesity, for all things that relate to health, and that costs us money. So how do we connect those two?
We go to a little bit on the city's financing and,
Sure.
For voters who are just hearing your position
Sure.
on this now, one of the questions that we want to clarify is where Nashville's debt is right now. Are you comfortable with that? And also, as you look at, I know we were talking about pensions, but that whole issue, can you give us your stance on how you feel about all that and how you'd manage that?
Sure. So I have taken a look at our debt since we came into office, and we are actually it's at 10.9% of our overall budget is going to our debt service. That is a little less than it was when we came in 2007. So if you look at where we are, and then if you look at where Moody's and S&P recently took a look at our debt, they reaffirmed our bond ratings and said, we're comfortable, but we are concerned about your unfunded healthcare liability. And so when we talk about that 2.3, and I think now it's actually 2.4 billion because it's gone up that much since we started talking about this several months ago, the Study and Formulating Committee's response to this is going to be key to our financial future. I mentioned when I came in that they released the report yesterday, and they have two recommendations that will save us $1 billion over 20 years. And if we don't do what they're recommending, it's going to cost us $7 billion. So for me, it's about being a financial steward of our resources and saying, how do we treat employees fairly? How do we keep the promises that we've made to current employees and retirees? But how do we look at new employees in a different way? And I'm okay with that. And I think that anybody who's going to come into this office and has saying, it's not a problem and don't worry about it and everything's fine and everybody's getting raises, I think should have a hard look at actually how finance gets done in government.
Regarding that, are there any innovative ways to compensate employees, especially, let's say, when the benefits aren't as rich as they were before, when perhaps salaries are stagnant? What are some of your ideas in terms of making sure that they're rewarded if they're doing things that, that benefit the public?
And one of the things that we've taken a look at too is in our recruitment and in our retention of employees. And a lot of employees anymore are not staying for 10 years. I mean, that's when you vest. So we're having a really hard time recruiting people right now to stick around because we don't give any kind of a pension benefit, until you hit that 10-year mark. You can roll that back and have a portable pension. So just like what other private entities do, if I'm vested in my pension at 5 years, I know in the private sector that's often the case, I can take it with me. and I can take it now. So much more like a 503B, a 401k, those kinds of portable pensions. And I think that will help us with our recruiting and our retention, because our salaries are not going to be as competitive as the private sector. So how can we make it at least as attractive? And that's one way to do it, by making it so that your pension is a little more flexible.
Through all of this process, and you obviously knew a lot coming in with the Metro Council about the current government, the current financial state, et cetera. Have you, in your head, defined, gosh, on day one, these have become my top 3 go-dos, or top 5, or whatever? What would you kind of march in and be all over right away?
Sure, and that's where I think that on day one, you actually get to structure your office. That is the basic piece. But a mayor doesn't ever have the luxury of just focusing on one thing. So you have multiple priorities that you are trying to drive all the time. And that for me is transit, education, and continuing to make sure that Nashville stays affordable while also growing. So, how do we do all of those things on day one? I think that the initial component is, how do you structure your staff? Because that is actually a critical moment in picking your leadership, and then also communicating to department heads how your office is going to run. And for me, I look at the opportunity to have a COO, a chief operating officer, who actually has the oversight and capacity of understanding the day-to-day operating of all of those departments. And that's a fairly typical model in business. It's not one that we've traditionally done here. We've done more of a deputy mayor model, but I would tell you a COO is probably where we go as we've grown. That's where we need to go.
And have you looked at other cities' models in preparation for those pieces?
Yeah,
Is the
yes.
COO model
Yes.
coming to?
For big cities, much more common, because the scope of what needs to happen and the work that needs to be done is so much greater than what just one person, that deputy mayor job and scope has. So yeah, COO is the way to go.
Do you have any other ideas in terms of how you'd structure your staff, or do you have people in mind that you would bring with you? And
I do have people in mind. One of the wonderful things about coming in is that you get a fresh start with fresh folks and fresh eyes. A lot of those people have jobs at the moment, and depending on how this race works out, I wouldn't want to put them at any disadvantage. So I haven't talked to anybody specifically, but I have in my mind the people who I think, that person would bring a great skill, a great leadership trait, a great depth of knowledge to fill a position that I would want to have.
When you talked about being a financial steward, I think there was some concern about the bond debt, about how many projects were on the table to get
Sure.
funded. Talk to us a little bit about infrastructure, how you would finance some of those projects. Are there key projects that you think should be put on the table or brought back, whether it's transportation, not necessarily the AMP, but some sort of better bus system or train system?
Transit is our big, huge challenge, and funding it is critical. So if you look at, again, you have to identify new revenue sources, and you also have to say, this is a regional problem, so how are we going to get the other parts of our region to come along and help with the cost burden? If you go back and look at what's available from a federal perspective, those grants that used to be an 80-10-10 match don't exist. So now we're looking at maybe 35% from the feds. So we've got to come up with the rest. Right now we have a 0.5 cent sales tax that is left over that is not encumbered currently. It would require a referendum in Davidson County to pass and allocate that 0.5 cent sales tax to whatever we wanted to use it for. At our current rate of sales tax, that could potentially put off about $80 million a year that could be dedicated to bonds to pay for transit, or again, anything else that we decide is a dedicated funding stream that we need for something. So the challenge comes in, everybody's got to come along, and that's where the mayor has to step up and lead. We have to find a funding mechanism for this, and it's the projections for a regional transit plan are $1 to $7 billion. These are not, but I think what's important, because I don't want to scare people, is that's not on day one. So, you go back to our bonding capacity. We're actually set to pay off 63% of our bonds in 10 years, which is going to continue to give us the bonding capacity depth that we're going to need to continue to borrow to do what we need to do. And we've got $131 million that we've allocated for our schools this year for capital improvements. And to me, I want to see us continue to focus a lot on improving our physical plant of our schools. I want us to make sure that kids, when they are walking in, understand that we as adults care about where they go to school. And so I'm excited about some of those projects, but the transit conversation is going to be the one that the next mayor is going to have to step up and lead on.
And one of the issues that came before the council, obviously, were the projects that Mayor Dean was advocating: the flood protection system, the relocation of the jail, and also the police headquarters. You had voted yes on some, no on others. Talk about your votes and why
Sure.
why these projects failed, and what the mayor could have done. If you had been in that position to lead, what would you have done differently?
So I voted for the flood protection system, and I voted against the jail, and I voted against the police precinct. And let me tell you why. The flood protection wall and system, I think, is critical to protecting the $2 billion investment that we have to downtown. Downtown is a tourist attraction. It generates a lot of those sales tax dollars that I was just talking about. If you look at our budget this year, where we're looking at new revenues, $35 million came from new sales tax revenue. Only $6 million came from property taxes. So, protecting an investment downtown to me made sense. And it was also happening all around the same time that you could see that the floods happening across the United States. And boy, I sure didn't want us to wake up and be Houston. My thing was, I hope we never use it, but I'd rather have it than not. Granted, so it didn't pass. And I think that it didn't pass, and this is where it's also critical for the next mayor to have that relationship with Metro Council. And I'm going to come from Metro Council, so I understand how important it is for council members to be part of the process. And you need to have that conversation with the council members and help them understand how this, if it's not a direct project that is in their district, what can we do for your district too? So it's not just about protecting downtown, because if other people felt like they needed to, we need to protect them as well. And as mayor, you would have a plan for that. So you would say, look, this is the first piece, this is the rest, and this is how we're going to do it. The jail, the police precinct, again, a lack of communication with the people who were going to be impacted, the community, the council members, and it was very clear that when they were brought into the process, they were not excited about it. It doesn't mean that they might not get excited later, but clearly at that moment, not going to happen, and that's why I voted against it.
Would you want to see that come back, or do you have another idea of how to solve the issue of the aging jail?
The aging jail, we actually did go ahead and put money into the capital improvement budget to renovate the jail. And although the community in Antioch did not want the jail out there for a whole lot of reasons, my concerns mirrored the community, but my concerns were also more focused on who is served by the jail system. We don't have transit in Antioch right now. So if I need to go see somebody, or they're getting released at 10 at night, where are they going? If I need to access my lawyer, how do I do that? If I need to access a bail bonds, all of the infrastructure that supports the jail system is downtown. And it's downtown for a reason, because that's where the courts are, that's where the transit is. So for me, there was a lot more about that as well, and wanting to keep that jail in its locale, but it definitely needs to be renovated.
On your website, you list a lot of comparison cities related to transit, whether it's Austin or Portland or Jacksonville,
Right.
Showing the fact that we only have 55 bus lines and one commuter rail line.
Right.
And the question is, how would you approach this funding? Knowing that Nashville Next report talked about $1 billion to $7 billion in investment, where do you go from here now? Building on Maria's question, where do you go? Where do you start the process? And how do you get it done?
Sure. So we've got the opportunity, because of the Mayor's Council that Carl created, to have those regional conversations, and they are moving. In fact, recently there was some major agreement. My understanding was that they are actually willing to explore a dedicated funding mechanism. Okay, well that's great, because we're going to need them to come with us. But I think it's more about the short, medium, and long term, because none of this is going to get fixed overnight. So what can you do immediately to alleviate traffic? And that absolutely is what I hear the most on the campaign trail. It's not, I mean, in fact, I'll have folks, everybody here in this room who took a bus to get here, raise your hand. So, our challenge is, how do you get people out of their cars and onto something else, be it a bus, a bike lane, a sidewalk, or any other mode of transit? And just on my way over here today, I was coming down Music Row, and today they don't have just one lane blocked, they've got 2 lanes blocked. And that's what's also slowing us down. It's great that we have all this construction, and it's great that developers are building, but at the same time, we need to get them to get out of those lanes of transit much, much quicker. And that will help speed up on the short run. So I've talked about this. I will actually have in my office an office that is completely dedicated to transit. And that is a focus because it will bring all of the departments together. You will, if you go over Korean Veteran Boulevard Bridge, yesterday, I noticed that Public Works came in and took out a median. And they did that because they want the traffic to flow faster. Well, now that's going to make it less safe for pedestrians. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why you have a consolidated approach to transit that's not just about going faster in your car. It is also about bike safety, pedestrian safety. So that's the short-term stuff that we can do right now. But the bigger term conversation is about light rail. It is about putting more commuter lines into Nashville. It is about joining us up. And it's about getting CSX to come along. I mean, we've gotten a fairly clear message that they're not interested in giving over their rail lines to us. But now the conversation is, can we have access to your right-of-way? Because that'll help us significantly reduce the cost it's going to take. And Senator Ketron is interested in monorail. So, I mean, I think what I see happening is lots of conversations from the MPO, from the Regional Transit Authority, from our own transit authority. What the next mayor has to be is the person who is taking all of that conversation and leading it.
So how would your Office of Transit work with the MTA and the RTA, for example?
Again, the Office of Transit will be part of the leadership of making sure that all of those pieces are talking together. That's my biggest frustration, is that right now you can pull a special permit and block 3 lanes of traffic, but nobody knows that just happened, so that the grid gets shut down. I mean, you have to actually have everything just work at a basic level first, and that's what that Office of Transit will do.
Now, you've also been an advocate for universal pre-K.
Yes.
And I know that there was nearly an effort to try to derail that in the legislature earlier this year. How do you see that in the future? Because it probably will come back again. You'll probably still be fighting with or whomever will be fighting with the legislators on that kind of funding.
Sure.
There was a $33 million grant.
Right.
And how do you continuously fund that commitment?
So I think, again, that goes back to one of the things that Mayor Jean has done really well is he has gone out and found these grants and brought them in as pilots and said, we did that with teacher recruitment, I think is a great example Carl did. And then so you do it for several years and then you see if it works. And then if you need to parlay that into a budget expense, you do. But you actually then have the ability to look at data and say, this has been a successful program. And I will use the ELL as an example. So I spoke specifically with some of the people who are part of the pre-K program, and at the end of this year, they had lots of kids in their program that were ELL kids, and now those kids are going to go to kindergarten, and they're going to be kindergarten ready, and they don't need the significant resources wrapped around for ELL. Well, that's a cost savings. So again, trying to find the innovative ways, but I do believe in pre-K. We know it works. I don't want those 600 kids on a wait list. I want them in a pre-K program, because I want them to have the most opportunity.
And for our viewers, ELL is English Language Learners.
Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
That's all right.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, that's another major investment. We have 12% of the population that's foreign-born. You've got a growing number of immigrants who are in the school system and non-English speakers. The school board might be requesting a major expenditure in the millions of dollars related to English language learning. Have you had any discussions or have any thoughts in terms of how you fund that and whether you're willing to make that commitment? Because I've heard anything, it could be $5 million, $16 million. It certainly varies.
I don't have the depth of actually what you're, specifically what you're talking about, but I have had conversations with the different board members about what are some of our opportunities? And one of the things that we talk about, which is I think exciting, is that we're actually in a growing urban school system. I mean, we're growing, and a lot of that is because we have so many new folks coming to Nashville, and a lot of those new folks are new Americans. So, we've tried to focus that in different ways throughout government by creating the Office of New Americans, which is an office where new Americans can have access to a lot of the resources that they need to be successful. Today, there's an announcement for a new Americans Entrepreneur Center that would be, I think, very exciting through Tennessean Americas. And so again, I think about trying to find the opportunities for our new folks to be successful. And if that means also making sure that the resources are there for English language learners, what a gift to be bilingual, trilingual. I think it really helps us in recruiting companies because we're not just competing with Williamson County, or we're never really competing with Williamson County, we're a region. So, but we're competing with global companies to come, and we need our folks to be multilingual. What a great thing, I think.
You had talked about when you were prioritizing your top 3 items for Nashville, you had specifically said that you want to keep Nashville growing but affordable.
Right.
Can you talk with us about your either specific plans or ideas or programs you've seen elsewhere that you want to bring to Nashville for affordable housing?
Sure. So if you go and look at the research that Jim Frazier has done at Vanderbilt, I think he's articulated this in a really clear way. You need to fund some kind of a fund, which we've done through the Barnes Fund, and this year on Metro Council, we actively went out to find a new revenue stream to put dollars into that. Because again, think about this. You always have to find new money if you want to do something, or you have to raise taxes. So one of the two has to happen. Either get creative in your new money, which we did with the Airbnb. So any new short-term rental that has to pay a tax, there's a penny that's part of that does not go to the general fund now, it goes to the Barnes Fund. All right, so we're working to fund that. It's not going to be enough, but it's a start. With the new convention center deal, or the old convention center deal, there's a $5 million set aside to also go into the Barnes Fund. So again, trying to find these new opportunities. Then you've actually got to build affordable housing. And the projections are 3,000 to 6,000 units a year, but we're not going to build our way out of it, right? So you can have these public-private partnerships with not-for-profits to move that needle, but ultimately you've got to protect the housing that you have, and therein lies the biggest challenge. So how do you do that? Well, you actually go out and make sure that people can age in place, and you can work with organizations, which we've done, like Rebuild Nashville, that for $10,000 and a lot of volunteer hours can go in and make sure that somebody who is potentially being priced out of their neighborhood has a new roof, has accessibility with stairs so that they don't have to leave. But when you talk about what other programs are out there, we have a senior citizen tax freeze now, that if you hit a certain age and a certain income, you can freeze your taxes, which is another way to keep you in your home. But that doesn't impact people who are just low income, who this may be their home, it's been passed on to them from their parents, and they want to stay. There are other states out there that do what is called a Homestead Act, which takes into account income, but also, and disregards the age piece, but it has much more of a component about this is your family home, how do you keep it? That's a state requirement. A state action would be required to do that. And I've been talking with some of our state representatives because I think they're very interested in helping Nashville remain affordable. So I think we're going to be able to make some progress on that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we've got a bill today that's coming up on council that is about inclusionary zoning. And it's about incenting developers to do what you want them to do. This will have a 14% goal of any new building that's 8 units or more that you would put a set aside for affordable housing in that unit. Now, it's a goal, so we're working with the developers because we don't want to have an unintended consequence. And several years ago, there was a neighboring city that put a moratorium on all new building and all new residential building. They've had 20 years to try to come back from that. So I think it's just passing legislation and not being thoughtful about it is sometimes has that blowback, and you don't want that. We want to be deliberative about how we keep our affordable housing. And last and certainly not least, I will re-energize the Office of Neighborhoods so that neighbors have a voice in how we're growing. And I will also make sure that our planning commission has more neighborhood voices on it. Because I've heard that loud and clear, that people want to make sure that neighborhoods are growing in the way they want. So.
You know, the affordable housing issue is interesting because part of it deals with the low-income scenario, and certainly it deals with having a vision for planning your growth and things like that. You know, but the bigger initial is the young folks who want to live urban and can't afford it. And,
right.
So part of this is also not necessarily low income,
right,
in the traditional sense, but also service workers, our young startups, our creatives.
Yep.
All those pieces.
And so the legislation is caring for that. It is not just about low income. It's also about that folks who are cost burdened, that are a little in that demographic. Yeah. Our teachers, our firefighters, our police officers, who we want to have stay here. And it's actually interesting because if you look at who, when I talk to folks who are showing houses, realtors to people, low, like the millennials, which by the way, thank you for that. That was a great conversation with millennials. The millennials, and then folks who are, post kids, are all looking for the same kind of housing. They want urban, they want smaller, they want transit, they want walkability. So you get that these two ends of the demographic actually looking and wanting the same thing. In fact, it's almost to the point where I think about my own, kind of nice house. I think, is there going to be anybody out there for me to sell it to? Because maybe nobody's going to want it.
It's one of the tough things right now with housing because a lot of people are able to sell, but getting back into this market is one of those things that's difficult.
You're so right. I think.
Do you have a sense as to what the housing forecast is for the next few years? Obviously, that's not something you can control, but it's certainly something that as newcomers start coming in, they're wondering, yes, this is a city, we're growing so much, we're accelerating in price, but can we afford to live here?
Well, and I think that's where you have to say, okay, where are the neighborhoods where because you also want to maintain that affordability for those neighbors. So where we look at the ones that have been the most impacted, I would say it's the Nations, it's Cleveland Park, it's areas. Well, I'll tell you where it's coming. Like Katy Hill is a neighborhood that's over off of Trinity Lane, and recently we disapproved a cement plant that was going to come in. Nobody wants a cement plant in their neighborhood. So now that neighborhood, though, is going to be a lot more interesting to people because it's been preserved. It's very close to downtown. And you have lots of longtime residents there. So, how do we keep those longtime residents there? And also, and obviously, if you want to sell your house, nobody should stop you from selling your house. But a lot of other cities out there have housing trust funds that continue to maintain, and I would like us to have one. I look at my own street. It's a great example. It's half rental, half single family owned. And a lot of those houses are old houses and they have 3 apartment units in them. I think there's at least 9. And so if something were to happen and that house flips, it's most likely that it will be gutted and turned back into a single family home and we'll lose 3 units. So there's an opportunity for a housing trust to come in and to scoop that up and say, we're going to maintain those 3 apartments because it's in an urban setting, it's walkable, it's on a transit line. I mean, it's all these things. Plus, you want affordability all over Nashville. And the folks who live there are people who are just starting out. I've got retirees. I've got musicians. I mean, it's what keeps my neighborhood interesting and makes Nashville, I think, the place that we all look to and say, yeah, Nashville's a cool place. Yeah.
In your commercials, you've differentiated yourself by talking about the fact that you didn't have the millions of other candidates, that you started Grassroots at a very neighborhood level. How have those messages resonated with people that you meet on the street, with voters, at forums, and so forth?
Well, I think that is the power of our campaign. I mean, one of the beauties of being able to have done this before is that I've had the ability to be out all over this county talking to people. And I have been overwhelmed with the amount of people who want to come and work on our campaign. So we have 25 interns. We have 200 volunteers. Every Tuesday night we do a phone bank. And people just show up. And so for us, it's one of those things where I feel like our message is getting out. And we are targeting our message to the folks that have been receptive. And I think that that's been a plus for us. We don't have the millions that a lot of the other candidates do. So we have to be really thoughtful about how we use our resources. And I think that has been the hallmark of our campaign. We've been outspent 3-to-1 on TV commercials for some candidates, even more from some candidates. But at the same time, our message is resonating. People are seeing our commercials. People are remembering our message. And I also believe that, I started this this journey of politics, or if you want to call it that, with my neighborhood association. I got involved there first, and then my child's PTO. So I really feel like I come at this with a grassroots approach, and that makes it, it's kind of overwhelming when you drive down the street and see people have your sign in their yard, and you think, that's so cool that somebody thinks enough about me and my candidacy to want to actually proclaim to their neighbors that I'm supporting Megan. And it's a real honor, and it's pretty humbling.
You want to talk about Metro Council and some of the proposed amendments?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. As you know, the 3 charter amendments, thank you.
I do.
The 3 charter amendments, for our viewers, Charter
Sure.
Amendment 1 would reduce the size of the council from 40 to 27. The number 2 would reduce that to the same number, but at the same time extend term limits by 1 term, so from 2 to 3 terms. That's the Emily Evans amendment.
Well, the first one only does term limits. It doesn't touch the council size. I'm sorry, is that what you said? Okay, okay. Yeah, sorry.
No, and then Charter Amendment 3 is the 40% of the workforce for metro construction projects over $100,000
Right.
would be from Davidson County. What are your positions on this?
Sure, well, let's just take Amendment 1 first, which is would extend the term limits from 2 term limits to 3 term limits, only for the vice mayor and the Metro Council, does not affect the mayor. And having served on the Metro Council, I can tell you that having that 3rd term would be good for neighborhoods. Because by the time you have somebody come in who has learned the ropes, and remember, these are part-time citizen legislators who for the most part have full-time jobs. So at least you've been able to learn how things work, and I also believe that ultimately people can vote you out if you're not doing what you need to do. So I actually support Amendment 1. Amendment 2, which reduces the council size, I think it's an amendment in search of a problem. And let me be more specific. I believe that right now, each of the council members has a significant amount of constituents that they serve. And what makes Nashville so unique is you can see your council member in the grocery store, you can call them on the phone, you can email them, and they respond. They come to your community meetings. I think by adding a significant portion of more constituents, but not giving any more resources or providing any other support, you're going to create an opportunity for neighborhoods to have less of a voice because their council members are going to be fairly overwhelmed with that new component of constituents. I actually like the fact that I know my council member. I like the fact that I can call her up if I have a problem, and she responds to me. And I worry that increasing the council size will dilute that. Mm-hmm. So I'm not in support of that one.
Decreasing the council size.
Yeah, I don't, yeah. And I also, I like the fact that we are part-time citizen-led legislature. I don't want to see that change either. I'm not advocating for this to become a full-time job that you need all these resources. I actually like the way it works, and I think it works very well. The third one? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the problem that the Third Amendment is trying to solve, you see this in the conversations all around Nashville where people want access to jobs, especially jobs where taxpayer-funded dollars are going. If I were to predict, it's very likely that if this passes, I would predict that the state will probably immediately overturn it. So then I would say to you, let's go back to the problem we're trying to solve. And how do we do that? And that is the role of the next mayor to say, if we need to get more people trained and up to speed so that they can be qualified for the jobs that are coming here, the construction jobs especially, there are opportunities to work with LIUNA, American Building Contractors. I mean, they both have the ability to do apprentice programs, and so let's do it. The amendment may or may not pass, I don't know, but ultimately I want to solve that problem.
Would you vote for that amendment?
Yes.
Okay. You had mentioned at the LGBT forum. I'm sorry.
You would vote for Amendment 3?
I signed the petition, and
Because you had started by saying it's in search of a
No, that was my second one.
I'm sorry. You're okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you
no,
would
yeah.
vote for,
I
then it
will,
would be overturned, I'm sorry.
yeah, it'll be overturned. And I mean, I believe that I want Davidson County workers to have an opportunity to be part of our great growth. And like I said, the likelihood is it will be overturned. So from my perspective, it would be great to just solve the problem. Do I wish this wasn't on?
Right. So you'd vote for it just in a signal of support for Davidson workers,
Yeah.
knowing that it wouldn't go anywhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
One of the things that you mentioned at the LGBT forum is that one group that's not happy with you is the Sons of the Confederacy, and
They are not.
and this goes back to our earlier conversation about the Nathan Bedford Forest.
Right.
If you're elected mayor, you're going to have to bring a lot of disparate groups together that perhaps you might have alienated during the campaign. What is your approach to
Sure.
bringing these folks together, especially those who probably feel very wounded by that, whether right or wrong, that's their perspective?
Well, I go back to, I do believe that symbols are powerful. So I don't think that having the Nathan Bedford Forest and that display as you drive into Davidson County is the message that I think Davidson County represents. So I'll just start with that. But it is the mayor's job. When you're elected, just like when I was elected as council at large, you represent everybody, whether they voted for you or not. And in my administration, everybody's trash is going to get picked up. Everybody is going to have access to a great school. You're going to have sidewalks go into your neighborhood. I mean, I don't care what your ideology is. I mean, I think that ultimately what makes government efficient and effective is when it serves all constituents, and that's what I would do.
We have about 10 minutes left of our conversation. I don't know if there are any other questions or any other topics you'd like to
No, I was
address?
going to ask just a general question.
Sure.
You know, a lot of this race, and we know that there's a portion of voters who are just really getting engaged,
Right.
obviously, and that's natural. But you've been through a lot of sound bites, a lot of 60-second answers,
Sure.
30-second answers, TV spots that are 30 seconds.
Sure.
You've appeared at countless places. Is there anything that you've not had the chance to say in depth that you'd want to say about your campaign, about who you are, and why you really feel that you're the best person at the right time?
Sure, and you're so right. We have spent a lot of time all over this county. In fact, my husband and I joke at night. He'll say, "Okay, I'm going to ask you a question." And I'm like, "Okay, do I have longer than 60 seconds to answer?" Go. The fact of the matter is campaigns do get reduced to sound bites, and they do get reduced to trying to get your message out as succinctly as possible. So when I sit back at night and think, what are the things that I want people to know about me, or what do I want them to have a deeper understanding of me? It is funny, I think that I really want people to know how I got here. Like, how did I get to Nashville, and why do I think that this is a thing that I'm the best person for this job? And I look at, starting off in Kansas, I have an undergraduate degree in elementary education, which I think somebody said to me the other day, really? You haven't? I said, yeah. I actually spent some time in a classroom. So I do have a deep appreciation for how important that is and what that brings. In fact, I still have a lifetime certification in Missouri. So if this doesn't work out. I think, and I came to Nashville, like I think a lot of people do, never intending to stay. And that, I think, is the story that I hear the most. Just how many people are struck by when you got here, you weren't sure, but within weeks, months, people fall in love with this place because there is just something really special about Nashville. And for me, wanting to lead our city for the next 4, hopefully 8 years, I think we're on a precipice. And I think that precipice, we could go a lot of different ways, which is why I think the next mayor is so important. And I go back to, I want to be that mayor because I want to lead us into our future. And I want to lead us because I believe I have those skills to do it. And I don't want somebody who has to learn on the job. I don't want somebody who has to figure out how government works. I don't want somebody who has never looked at a budget from a government side and understood that government isn't a business, that everybody is going to get trash and everybody is going to get fire and police. There aren't winners and losers. So, I want us to make sure that we're moving that Nashville forward, but at the same time, growing in a way that allows our creative class to thrive here. So, we recently passed some legislation that created this work maker space. And those are the things that I know they don't get talked much about, but this work maker space now, you'll be able to live in a place where you actually work. And by that, like if you're a welder and you want to weld some cool art project, you could do that. And I think I think the next mayor has to figure out these creative ways to be deliberate in making sure that Nashville stays innovative and creative. Because I think, to me, that's the essence of who we are. And if we lose that, then we just become some big city. And I don't want us to be that. So I think, I think I'm creative. I think I'm innovative. I think I have those skills, and I think I can lead us. And this is so much longer than any 60 seconds I've ever been able to sit and answer. So thank you for that. But at the end of the day, I also will bring good people around me, and good people will make the difference. No mayor is going to do this by herself. And so, I think I have a good eye for bringing in creative, innovative, and talented people who care deeply about Nashville, just like I do. And that's what we need going forward.
A couple of the candidates have been very specific about not having any future goals for public office besides the mayor's office. Can you talk to us, if you're elected, you talked about 4 to 8 years, but what would come after that for you?
That is so funny. I don't have additional political ambition. I'm running for this job, and this job only. And if this goes as I hope it does, then I hope I get the opportunity to serve as mayor for 4 to 8 years. And if not, then we'll see what comes next. But for me, this is the job I want. This is the job I want now. This is the job that I hope I'm voted by the voters, and that's where I am.
Any final words for our viewers before we end?
Well, sure. Do I get to look into the camera? Yes, I would be honored to earn your vote and your support on August 6th. Thank you.
Thank you to our
Thank
viewers,
you.
to our editorial board, to
Thank
Ms.
you.
Berry, and on Tennessean.com, continue watching replays of interviews, and remember to register to vote and to vote on August 6th. Thank you so much.
Thanks.